Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, Revenge Week continues for the third week in a row. The Eagles Super Bowl winning head coach Doug Pederson returns with the 2-1 Jacksonville Jaguars, who feature a red-hot quarterback in Trevor Lawrence going up against the... Redo. Let this buffer out for a sec anyway. Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, Revenge Week continues for the third week in a row as former Eagles Super Bowl winning head coach Doug Pederson returns with the red-hot 2-1 Jacksonville Jaguars featuring Trevor Lawrence, who is playing as good as maybe anybody but the Eagles quarterback in Jalen Hurts. We take a first look at Eagles Jaguars on today's edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. I'm Louis DiBiase. Welcome into a Wednesday edition of the show. You can find all 5 podcasts every week available on all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well. And make sure you hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnBirds and at DiBiaseLOE. The Eagles are 3-0 for the first time since 2016. They dominated Carson Wentz on Sunday. They dominated the week before on Monday Night Football, Justin Jefferson and Jalen Reagor. Can they do the same against Doug Pederson and the Jacksonville Jaguars this Sunday? The Eagles could get to 4-0 for the first time since 2004. That's right. The last time the Eagles started the season 4-0 like they could this week was with Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens. The Eagles have a similar dynamic quarterback-receiver dynamic right here with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. Pick your poison. They're both wide receiver ones, but at least this duo, whichever one you choose, like each other a whole lot more than McNabb and T.O. did. But to get to 4-0, they're going to have to beat a very motivated Doug Pederson and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are 2-1. Trevor Lawrence is on fire. This is the number 1 ranked rushing defense in the league. They have a bunch of new weapons. Marvin Jones looks good in year 2 with Jacksonville. They also have Zay Jones, Christian Kirk. Surprisingly, the biggest upset of the season is making his contract, like he's making the money that he got paid this offseason, which was seen as maybe the biggest overpay in free agency history at the wide receiver position. He's making the most of that contract extension. You've got James Robinson and Travis Etienne. This is a good young team that Doug has playing really well. And the Eagles, again, look like they are in a week where they're playing a guy who wants to beat them extremely bad. And that is Doug Pederson, of course, who spent 5 years as the Eagles head coach from 2016 to 2020. I cannot believe it was only 5 years, considering this guy won the Eagles their first ever Super Bowl championship in 2017. He made the playoffs in 3 of 5 years, 3 of 4 years from that 2017 to 2020 stretch, 3 years in a row. Doug Pederson is an absolute legend. He has a statue outside of Lincoln Financial Field for a reason. The only guy to ever get this Eagles team a Lombardi trophy. He did it by beating Bill Belichick. He did it by being aggressive and fearless and overcoming incredibly tough obstacles from his time in Philadelphia. And that is why everybody, I'm going to be there at the game as well, everybody should be standing up when Doug runs onto the field for the first time since 2020. They should take their hats off and giving him a standing ovation. That is the not the only reason, because the Eagles are 3-0, and this is such an exciting matchup, and I'll take every opportunity I can to get to the link. But the main reason I chose this game especially to drive down to this season, of course, I'm going to the Wentz Monday night game later on too, but this was the first game I wanted to go to because Doug Pederson deserves his flowers on Sunday. He deserves all of the cheers, and there better not be a single boo in that building, because although things ended very disappointingly so in 2020 with only a 4-win season, and there was a lot of criticism about Doug Pederson and maybe his choices and who he surrounded himself with the assistant coaching staff. I think Doug did the best he could in a very tough environment. I think he did way more than anybody could have ever expected. I'll never forget listening to Sports Radio 94 WIP when they were interviewing all those coaches in 2016, there was Sean McDermott and Ben McAdoo, right? Maybe Josh McDaniels, I think, was still rumored. There was a million times McDaniels was considering being a head coach before he's now with the Raiders. And I remember they first interviewed Doug Pederson, and everybody said, no, this is not the move. This is just trying to, recreate what you had with Andy Reid. And Doug Pederson proved everybody wrong. And to me, I know Andy Reid, quantity-wise, is a very similar debate to like McNabb versus Nick Foles. Andy Reid has the quantity, right? 13 years, 5 conference titles, a Super Bowl appearance, the most wins of any Eagles coach. But Doug Pederson has the Super Bowl champion, and he beat the best head coach and the best quarterback ever to get the Eagles that first Lombardi. I think Nick Sirianni is a great head coach. Don't get me wrong. I think he is a perfect replacement for Doug Pederson. Nick has a lot of the same strengths, honestly, that Doug does. I think there's a reason Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie gravitated towards Sirianni. They like a lot of things that Doug Pederson had and Frank Reich have that they see in Sirianni. So I think the Eagles are very well off right now as head coach. I think they're going to be okay for the long term with Nick, but I will never believe, as bad as it ended in 2020, I will never believe that Doug Pederson deserved to get fired. What he did in 2017 to 2020 in extremely hard circumstances was incredible. This guy won, again, a title. Then he nearly got back to another one in 2018. He was a few plays away from getting back to the NFC Championship. By the way, both of those years with a backup quarterback. Then he won the division the next year in 2019 while dealing with a historic stretch of injuries over that 4-year stretch. Bad draft and roster management by Howie Roseman. A middling owner in Jeffrey Lurie, who even in wins Thursday Night Football against Green Bay in 2019 said that Doug didn't win it the right way because they ran the football. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman were very influential in who Doug sometimes had to have on his coaching staff. They had a lot of power over Pederson while he had very little to no say in front office decisions. Of course, he did have his say, right? I think he liked Jalen Reagor. He sided with Jeffrey Lurie when it came time in 2019 to draft J.J. Arcega-Whiteside or Paris Campbell or DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin. So Doug wasn't completely powerless, but for a head coach of the resume he had, where he won a Super Bowl championship, he nearly got back the next year, he won a division in 2019. The fact that in 2020, Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie basically forced him to have all of these different cooks in the kitchen on his coaching staff, I think Doug drew a very bad hand after they won the title. Nothing could just smoothen out. And yeah, was his play calling not great? Was his decisions with his own coaching staff suspect? And did he maybe give Howie and Lurie reasons at times to doubt? For sure. But he earned the right to make his own decisions. And I really don't think he got that full say ever, even after winning that Lombardi. And yet Doug still, again, remember all those injury reports? Remember what Pederson had to deal with and the inconsistency that he had at quarterback? What he did for Nick Foles to this day in 2 years, in back-to-back years where, Nick Foles and this offense looked dead in the water in 2017 when Carson Wentz tore his ACL. Doug and Frank Reich and John DeFilippo was the entire coaching staff, but Doug was the mastermind behind revamping that entire offense to look like what Chip Kelly did with Nick in 2013. He put his ego to the side and said, yes, I have a certain offense, but I'm going to fit my offense to the strengths of my players. It's what Nick Sirianni also does very well. And then the next year, they're 5-7, 6-7 after that loss to Dallas. Wentz goes down on IR with that fractured back, and Doug allows Nick Foles yet again to get hot and totally turn around that season and nearly get back to the NFC title. And if they make it to LA in the NFC title, I think they beat the Rams. I think they beat the Patriots, and he could have won back-to-back Super Bowls. And that, again, was with inconsistency at quarterback, a catastrophic, historic amount of injuries at literally every position you could think of on the starting lineup. Everybody got hurt at least once or twice. He was never dealing with a roster at full strength, and he had to deal with Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, who have their strengths, but they made it very difficult on Doug. I will never believe that he deserved to get fired. I think they did, just like with Carson Wentz, they cleaned up as best they could with Nick Sirianni. Same with Jalen Hurts. But I don't think Doug should have ever got fired. I think he is a great coach, and he is proving it in Jacksonville right now with the way he has that team overachieving, the way he has Trevor Lawrence looking right now, through 3 games, it's an incredible feat. And I think Doug and Sirianni, both of these guys could be early favorites to win head coach of the year. It's going to be a fascinating matchup on Sunday. Doug Pederson deserves a standing ovation, and I don't think anybody's really going to fight on that much. And they will fight on Carson Wentz if you're going to boo Carson or not on Monday Night Football in a few months. Doug, can't imagine there's going to be many jeers on the field, in the stands, anywhere. Philadelphia loves Doug Pederson forever. I want to dive into the quarterback aspect of this matchup coming up next, because just like Nick Sirianni and Doug Pederson are maybe favorites right now to win Coach of the Year, Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence could be early MVP favorites. These two young quarterbacks are red hot, and I think it's going to be the key matchup to watch. We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. At LinkedIn Jobs, you can gear up for fall. You need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find those people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring, so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back in to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles, and we thank you so much for making LOE your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase. We are taking a first look at this big-time matchup between the 3-0 Philadelphia Eagles and the 2-1 Jacksonville Jaguars, led by an Eagles legend, Doug Pederson. I think the best head coach in Philadelphia Eagles history. The way he has that Jaguars team playing right now at 2-1, I put a bet on BetOnline already to have the Jaguars win the AFC South. I think Doug is going to be in the playoffs this year with the Jaguars. And considering they were the worst team in football last year with the worst head coach ever in Urban Meyer, he did a number on that organization. Doug turned things around. And the most impressive part is what he's done with Trevor Lawrence. And here's the thing, Trevor Lawrence, I thought was, maybe since, I don't know if it's too bold to say since Andrew Luck, it might be maybe a bit of a dramatic take, but I thought Trevor Lawrence, like Andrew Luck, was the guy that you said, okay, this is a complete prospect that only comes around once in a generation, right? So it's not like Doug Pederson took a guy like, even Jalen Hurts, for instance, that had to do a whole lot more, had to work at it way more to reach a certain ceiling that Trevor Lawrence did, right? Lawrence has all the physical tools. Doug just kind of had to mold that clay like we saw at Clemson with Lawrence. So it's not like he totally made this untalented player into an MVP. It's not like he turned Tom Brady into Tom Brady, right? Lawrence has all the talent for sure and deserves a lot of the credit for this Jaguars turnaround. But Doug Pederson has done, you can see what he's done for Trevor Lawrence. You could see the issues Lawrence had last year with confidence, and he wasn't sure about certain throws. He didn't see the field well. He was indecisive. His accuracy struggled. Urban Meyer destroyed that kid. And if they would have kept going with that in year 2 and year 3, I could have saw Lawrence, suffering a similar fate to what we saw of Carson Wentz in 2020, where eventually it was just going to be too much to handle. But Pederson is an incredible quarterback coach. I mentioned it in segment 1, the job he did with Nick Foles in 2017 and 2018. I think he was always a positive influence on Carson Wentz, even with the stories that have come out. He let Carson have free reign of that offense a lot. He knew how to get Wentz going a lot of the time with, up-tempo. And you saw the job those two did together with practice squad level weapons in 2019. You saw what he did even with Jalen Hurts in 3 starts down the stretch of the 2020 season, right? I mean, those two went in together and beat a red-hot New Orleans Saints team that weren't they the best? Didn't they have the best record in football at that time? And Doug really helped Jalen, for sure, more than maybe people talk about because it was such a short stint. Absolutely. Doug Pederson is an incredible quarterback mind, and he has Trevor Lawrence playing incredible football. Trevor Lawrence right now, He is on a pace, a 17-game pace of 4,375 yards, 34 passing touchdowns, just 6 interceptions, and a 69.4% completion percentage. That is a red-hot quarterback that's only in year 2, and I think this is the first real quarterback battle for Jalen Hurts, right? Carson Wentz last week, he had the emotional intrigue when it comes to the story of Hurts versus Wentz, but Carson Wentz is not at the level of play right now that Trevor Lawrence is at. You know, Jalen Hurts has checked, as we've said on the show so many times this year, Jalen Hurts has checked literally every box that we laid out for him on the checklist this offseason that he needed to check off to prove that he's a franchise quarterback. He has thrown with efficiency and higher volume. He has thrown over the middle of the field. He has thrown to the left, which was non-existent last year. He's used his legs but kept his eyes downfield to open the pass. His accuracy, efficiency with accuracy and ball placement is in another stratosphere compared to where it was last year. They're 3-0. He's still an elite running quarterback. He's beaten good defenses too. I think Minnesota's defense, Washington, Detroit, all underrated in that way. And he put up over 24 points on all of them in the first half, by the way. A red-hot quarterback that's beating good defenses, that's doing everything we want. But he hasn't really gotten into a quarterback battle yet, right? And I put more stock into that than most because a lot of people say it doesn't matter. Jalen doesn't play Trevor Lawrence. He plays the Jaguars defense. But I'm going to lay out a few reasons why quarterback battles are important, especially Hurts versus Lawrence. Number one, Trevor Lawrence, you know, the Eagles defense is red hot right now, but so is Lawrence. If Lawrence scores points, Hurts is going to have to keep up. That's where you get into a quarterback battle. You look at Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes last year. Don't tell me, oh, it wasn't Allen versus Mahomes. It was Allen versus the Chiefs defense. It was Mahomes versus the Bills defense. No. When a quarterback like Mahomes, that kind of day, gets that hot, there's no stopping him. There's nothing you can do if you're a defense. Josh Allen has to go toe-to-toe and be just as unstoppable. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is going to dominate the Eagles defense this week and put up 40-plus points, but a red-hot quarterback, you need to match that with your own hot quarterback play. And Jalen Hurts, these two, honestly, there might not be two quarterbacks more on fire right now in football than Hurts and Lawrence coming off the performances they had against the Commanders and the Chargers. So it'd be great to see Jalen go into his home stadium, get to an undefeated record at 4-0 for the first time in 18 years, right? 18 years? Yeah, 2004. And beat a quarterback that, to be honest, we all said that Hurts could never get to that level of play because he didn't have the physical upside, the traits that Trevor Lawrence does with the size, with the generational arm talent. Both have the mobility, but Lawrence seemed like he had a much higher passing ceiling, right? I mean, the kid was the first overall pick. And again, some people said he was the new Andrew Luck, where it's going to be another 10 years before this complete of a prospect goes into the draft. We always said that while we like Jalen Hurts, it's going to be really hard to love Jalen Hurts because we don't believe he can ever get to the level of a guy like Lawrence as a prospect. Well, he's doing it right now. And if he can beat Trevor Lawrence and outperform him this weekend, it's going to continue on this eating crow tour that Jalen is making me and a lot of other people go on. It's going to be super fascinating to watch this matchup. It's a really big test. And again, it just looks like Lawrence was that standard that I never thought Jalen could get to. And it was why I was always going to be feeling unsettled until they found another guy. But Jalen has totally proven me wrong. And I would love to see him go out there and totally outperform Lawrence. Because Lawrence went in on Sunday in LA and beat a really good Chargers team that, yes, is beat up. Justin Herbert was injured, but Lawrence totally dominated a very talented defense. He looked like the young star quarterback in that matchup. So I would love to see Hurts kind of show that, hey, he's the MVP candidate right now. He's the better young quarterback despite all of the advantages we thought Lawrence had. Would love to see that on Sunday, 100%. We're going to wrap up the show coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles with some defense talk. Brandon Graham wins an award that Eagles players continue to win each and every week. The Eagles defense is red hot. Can they stay hot against Lawrence and Doug on Sunday? That's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, Louis DiBiase here wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. You can find the show on all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well, and on Twitter at Locked On Birds and at DiBiase LOE. Eagles Jaguars this Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field, 1 o'clock kickoff. The Eagles are 3-0. The Jaguars are 2-1. This is why I love the NFL, because yeah, the Eagles had all the upside in the world this offseason, but I don't think anybody thought they were going to be looking like the best team in football right now. And how many people picked the Jaguars to win the AFC South or to be at least leading it through 3 weeks? The NFL season is early, but I love the chaos of this league. You just never know what team's going to shine where. The Jaguars are the perfect example of, quarterback play and how, all it takes is that right guy to turn everything around for a team that was picking first overall in back-to-back years, right? And then you get a guy like Trevor Lawrence, you surround him with somebody like Doug Pederson, and suddenly they're a team that the very next year after picking first overall could be in the playoffs and could be a division champion that's raising a banner in the stadium next year. I mean, that's why I love football, and it's why I put so much pressure on Jalen Hurts and the quarterback position entirely. But it's also why Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence are a perfect example of why a support system around them, though, is so important. Look at what the Eagles have done for Jalen Hurts, giving him A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert and a strong offensive line, weapons everywhere, a great supportive, offensive-minded coaching staff, a great defense. He's an MVP candidate right now. And a lot of that has to do with, of course, his hard work and the work that he put in. But a lot of it has to do with what Howie Roseman has done to surround Hurts with the right talent to reach his ceiling. The Jaguars, the same thing with Trevor Lawrence. Last year, they set him up to fail. If he kept going with Urban Meyer, I could have seen a Carson Wentz post-2017, 2019, I should say, like regression. But they got him an offensive-minded coach in Doug Pederson. They got him Evan Ingram. They got him Christian Kirk. They got him Travis Etienne. They got him Zay Jones. On defense, they got Devin Lloyd and Tavon Walker and Josh Allen. And Trevor Lawrence looks like an MVP candidate as well. Building around a quarterback is just as important. It is so crucial. And it's why a lot of teams fail and why a lot of other teams succeed, for sure. And it's why, too, these two teams saw what not having that support system could do to a quarterback. Look what happened when Carson Wentz had to carry the entire load after 2019. He regressed at a historic rate. Look at what happened last year with Trevor Lawrence with Urban Meyer. This was, again, an Andrew Luck type of prospect coming out of Clemson that looked completely lost. And this year, he looks amazing. So what's the difference? It's the support system. It's the main part of it. Absolutely. And I think the Eagles and Jaguars are doing an incredible job of making sure Hurts and Lawrence succeed. But it's not just the quarterbacks that are succeeding for these teams. It's the defenses. And when it comes to the Eagles defense, they're on fire. It's an absolute joy to see just how good this defense is, and not just how good they are, but how complete they are. The Eagles have not been this complete on the defensive side of the football in a decade plus, right? The Eagles have had some really good defenses over the years. The Super Bowl season in 2017, they were really good. They had one of the best defensive lines in football. You can put 2018 in there as well. They had one of the best safety tandems in football with Rodney McLeod and Malcolm Jenkins. They had red-hot linebackers in Nigel Bradham, Michael Kendricks. You had Jordan Hicks, in and out of the lineup. So they had a pretty damn good defense with certain elite traits. But when was the last time you could say to yourself, the Eagles' defense is stars at every position, where they're not winning in spite of anything? Because 2017, one thing they were winning not because of, but just with, and maybe even in spite of, was the cornerback position with Jalen Mills, with Ronald Darby, with a rookie Rasul Douglas. 2018, 2019, 2020, it was always musical chairs at the cornerback position. Last year, what was the defense winning in spite of? Honestly, it was in spite of a really bad four-man pass rush. They were one of the least efficient pass rushing units in the entire NFL last year when it came time to get the quarterback down to the ground. They were in the bottom tier of the NFL in sacks. So even when the Eagles defense has had success, when you look at the statistics of an entire season, in a playoff season even, a championship season, it never felt like they were just one of those defenses like that were historic, that you look back and say, oh yeah, that's one of the best defenses in franchise history. There wasn't a single hole. They had, like the Seattle Seahawks, the Legion of Boom. They had pieces at linebacker, in the secondary, on the defensive line, everywhere. It's really hard to put together two complete units on a football team every year, so I'm not blaming really anybody for this. But the Eagles this year look like that defense, where they do not have any holes. on this entire unit. They have stars in the defensive line that sacked Carson Wentz 9 times on Sunday. They have stars at linebacker, TJ Edwards and Kazir White. How are you going to pay both of these guys in the offseason? And you got Nakobe Dean waiting in the wings. These two look like the best linebacker tandem in football, or at least a top-tier unit. Darius Slay and James Bradbury are two of the best cornerbacks in football right now. So is Avonte Maddox. They're all getting top 10 grades according to Pro Football Focus. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps. We thought safety was going to be the clear weak link of this defense this year. They have not been the weak link. Marcus Epps looks really good, and I thought Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, since they traded him, has worn a ton of hats and has exceeded expectations as a high safety that we never saw him be with the New Orleans Saints. The Eagles defense has never been this complete in the 2010s and now into the 2020s. They are so complete, and it continues. Brandon Graham was named NFC Defensive Player of the Week this week. It's now the third time an Eagles player has won NFC Player of the Week honors. Week 1, cornerback Zach McPherson wins Special Teams Player of the Week. Week 2, Darius Slay wins Defensive Player of the Week. Week 3, defensive end Brandon Graham wins Defensive Player of the Week. Defensive linemen, corners, TJ Edwards, you could have even said, should have won this award. It's so nice to see such a complete defense right now working in the city of brotherly love. And we know, look, we all love offensive football. It's 2022. You win because of your offense. You win because you throw the ball. You win because of your quarterback. But I know you guys. I know my listeners. I know Eagles fans. You guys love defense. You'll love defense, especially my older listeners. You love good defense, and I know you're eating up what the Eagles are doing right now, eating themselves the first 3 weeks of the season. And I love for Brandon Graham that he won Defensive Player of the Week this week because, you know, I feel like especially him and Fletcher Cox. I'm a very nostalgic person. You guys know that listening to this podcast. The amount of historic ties and references or analogies, if you will, that I bring into the show to compare now to then. It happens basically every show. So personally for me, it's been a joy to watch Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox almost turn back the clock because those two we knew were still going to be very important pieces this year of the puzzle, but it was kind of a changing of the guard, it felt like this year, right? You pay Hassan Riddick that 3-year contract extension. You signed Josh Sweat to that extension last year. You've got Javon Hargraves. You spent a 3rd-round pick on Milton Williams. You drafted Jordan Davis in the 1st round. It's like, okay, Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham now, their roles have been reduced to rotational pieces that aren't going to be atop the rotation. You know, the Eagles have always rotated their defensive line, but Cox and Graham always led the defensive line in snaps. Always. Year in and year out. They're 4th and 5th all-time in sacks in franchise history for this team. But this year it was like, yeah, they're still going to have a key role, but are they going to have a bigger role than Jordan Davis and Javon Hargrave? Cox, that is. Is Graham going to have a bigger role than Riddick and Sweat or equal to? You know, and while those guys are still featured a lot, Graham and Cox have, maybe with Sweat, have been the 2 most consistent pass rushers through 3 weeks. I love it. I love seeing the 2017 Super Bowl heroes still be the guys this year, especially considering, you know, all those guys are pretty much gone now from that championship team. I mean, we're talking about Doug Pederson this year as the Jaguars head coach. Last week we were talking about Carson Wentz as the Washington Commanders quarterback. I mean, it's crazy what 5 years can do in the NFL. And the only guys left are, you know, outside of special teams, you got Lovato and Elliott, but you've got Lane Johnson, you've got Jason Kelsey, you've got Isaac Seumalo, who, by the way, didn't even start on that championship team. It was Wisniewski. And then you got Cox and Graham. That's all you got left with Derek Barnett injured. So it's nice to see some of the Super Bowl 52 heroes that are legends in this team's history still dominate. And it's very impressive for Brandon Graham, especially considering this guy's in his mid-30s and he's coming off a torn Achilles. And the fact that he won Defensive Player of the Week this week, awesome. BG should be in the rafters in the link when he retires. Nobody should ever wear number 55 again. And I love to see he's still dominating in 2022. All right, Eagles fans, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. We thank you so much for making LOE your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson, they give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Louis DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. Locked On Eagles, and let's go Birds.